This billboard was at the Democratic Convention in Denver in 2008. We raised the money for the billboard project. The curator, Susan Reynolds, and I, we raised the money from private foundations, and then we partnered with arts organizations in each city to sponsor and deal with local press for the billboards. So this one went up at the Democratic Convention. It was sponsored by CBS Outdoor, which is a company that owns most of the billboards, the majority of the billboards in America. And then we had planned 5 billboards for the scene of the Republican Convention in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And a week before the convention, the billboard company canceled the billboards, canceled our contract, and said, because first they asked me, are they models, are they real, a bunch of questions like that. But then they said the motorists would think the soldiers were dead, and therefore we won't honor this contract. So I thought at the time, well, you know, they own the billboards, they should be able to cancel us if they want. But in fact, because they own all the billboards, it was a question of censorship, and there was a lot of press around this issue. We scrambled to have one more billboard in Minneapolis in time for at the last day of that convention, and then we went on to many different cities putting billboards with Clear Channel, which is an even more conservative organization than CBS Outdoor. This was in Houston, and you see this in the context of that the interesting thing about the billboards is that you look at a billboard and you expect a commercial. You think you're going to be sold something. And these soldiers are very young and beautiful, so some people would think, well, what, are we selling perfume here, or Calvin Klein underwear, or what, you know, what are you selling here? Certainly it's not a recruitment ad. Maybe it's an ad for a movie or something. So that there's this ambiguity about it, which I think made people think about both the word, the head, and the word soldier. And I think actually the word becomes as important as the head in this respect. And there was a web address on the billboard so that people would write in and say, this is horrible and obscene and disrespectful to our troops, or this is exactly what we need to see. And there was a back and forth conversation about the billboards, which was great because people talked to each other, and hopefully it made people think a bit. This was the billboard one of the billboards in Houston. And people would write and they'd say, oh, I drive by this billboard every day, and it makes me think of my ex who's in Iraq. And, you know, so people had because they drive by them every single day and see the face again and again, people would have very personal reactions to the billboards. So after that project, I had a grant to continue, and I decided that even though when I began, I didn't really think about coming home. I guess I did think about coming home, but the pictures are really about coming home from war and what one brings home from that experience. So I decided that I would photograph soldiers from many wars. This series is called Many Wars, and it's soldiers from Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, the Cold War, and World War II, which are not, the World War II pictures are not here. But so once again, I wanted to work under the umbrella of the military in some way, because that made it more possible for me and more comfortable for the soldiers. So I worked in a Veterans Administration clinic, and most of these people are in treatment for combat trauma of one sort or another. And this man, who went to Vietnam, was in Vietnam and was severely wounded in Vietnam, became a counselor. And he's the man who introduced me to many of the people in these photographs. So what I did was, again, it has to do with performance and a conceptual view of things. So I thought, well, I put this fabric on people because I thought with this piece of fabric, with this simple device, it can allow the person to be a warrior, a homeless person, a martyr, a saint, a boy with a cape, any one of those things, any one of those personas that the subject would take on. Once again, I didn't talk to them, I just put it on them. And then we photographed, and then I did the interview. I interviewed them. I had to do extensive interviews, which I think are up on the wall next to the photographs. So I always photograph first in a very quiet way, and then I would interview the people. To me, I mean, I think everybody photographs has a different approach to doing portraiture, and to me, there's a kind of silent communication between the photographer and the subject sometimes, and that just happens to be the way I like to work. I think that if I had explained to the soldiers why I wanted them to put their heads on the table, I might have just talked it away, and we would have had an answer or a discussion rather than doing it. So I generally have the discussion afterwards. So this is the only woman I was able to photograph so far in this series. Apparently other women wouldn't volunteer because if women are in treatment for combat trauma of any sort, it's an issue of rape in the military, and that is something that they don't want to talk about. So far, she's the only one that came forward. This man was so interesting. He volunteered at age 32 to the National Guard. Many of these people are the National Guard, and generally the National Guard doesn't go to war. They build roads and soccer fields and things like that, and that's what he thought he would be doing, but instead he went to Iraq, and he searched for IEDs on the side of the road, and he suffered from traumatic brain injury, and you could see when he walked in the door, you could see what a powerful, positive force he was, but he was really just a shred of his former self. He searched for his words, and he was very diminished from that experience. But he's still a teacher in the little town where he lives in Vermont, and sometimes he's up at the board and he can't remember a word or something, and then the students have to help him. And these are all students who might be inclined to join the military, and that here they have a teacher who has, and they say, watch out, he'll go PTSD on you, you know. So he's in an interesting position because generally I'm told that veterans returning from war can never get a job as a teacher because the public is worried that they're baby killers or whatever they are, or that they'll fall apart, and they wouldn't get that job. But this gentleman was a teacher, and they keep him on. So, you know, I don't know if when I put this fabric on them, does he look like a saint? Was probably the idea of a saint couldn't be any farther from his mind. But does he look like a warrior? Probably a warrior, a hunter, a country boy. Does killer follow from warrior? Probably likely. And does homeless follow from killer, follow from warrior? Also likely. 1/3 of the homeless people in America are veterans. And then there's the question of this man, for instance, talks about the killing that he did in Iraq and has a great deal of remorse about that. If people would get too close to the Humvee, then they'd be told to stop, and if they didn't stop, they'd shoot a flare, and if they didn't stop, they'd kill them. And then this guy's 20 years old, and he's killed 7 people, and he comes home, and what does he do with that? He worries about, did those people have did that man have a family? Did he have children? Did he have a wife? He doesn't know anything about them. So this whole process of trying to atone for that, for what he did when he was 20 years old, sometimes can last a lifetime. Luckily now in America, people are dealing with these issues more readily than they have in the past, and they're getting help. Actually, when I met this man, he was afraid, when I took this picture, he was afraid that he was going to be sent back, and clearly he was in no shape to be sent back. And luckily he wasn't. And this man woke up in the middle of the night. Actually, didn't wake up. He was with his girlfriend, and he beat her up terribly in the night, sort of in a dream, not knowing what he did until she woke him up, and he was mortified by what he'd done. He went to jail and turned himself in, and now he's suffering from that and thinks that nobody will ever trust him again. How will he ever get out of this? You know. And so this photograph was made before I knew that story, and in the photograph he looks a bit like he's sleepwalking. So that's part of what I like about working in this way, because the relationship between me and the subject is very fresh, and I don't know their story. So sometimes something can evolve that is actually pertinent to their situation. But this is the last image here. This man, he's 24, I think, and I asked him to pose for me, and he was going to, and then he decided he was too upset, he couldn't do it, he couldn't tell his story again, because it was a story and a photo, and I said, well, maybe you'd just like to be photographed. I mean, he was shortly back from the war, so he was very, very volatile. There's what they call that's apparently the most difficult time when people first come back. So I hope this picture portrays that. And that's that. Thank you.